I know that you people like to listen to our chilling stories while sleeping on your beds, so do this before you fall asleep. While listening to the story, I will be happy to know from which country you are listening to this story. Please let me know by commenting, and if you are new to our channel, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. So let's go. Story 1. The Shadow of Amityville. I never imagined that a beautiful and peaceful home would become a terrible nightmare for my family. My name is Mike, and I was living a simple and happy life with my wife Sarah and 2 children, Amy and Josh. When we bought this house in Amityville, New York, we thought it was our new beginning. The house was huge, 6 bedrooms, a big garden and a lake in the back. But why was this house so cheap? This question always lingered in my mind, but I ignored it. When we first entered the house, it felt like the house was trying to swallow us. The air was heavy, and a strange chill surrounded the whole atmosphere. When we stepped into that house, there was something strange. Me, my wife Sarah, my 2 children Amy and Josh, and my 2 friends John and Alyssa, all thought that this would be our new home. But as soon as I opened the main door of the house, a cold wind hit our faces. It was as if we were touched by an invisible force. The house was old, but also charming. The sound of the wooden floors and the beams on the ceiling gave it a historic feel. "This house is magical, Mike. We'll love it here," said Sarah. But as soon as we entered, I felt as if someone had noticed our presence. The children were running around in the garden, yelling with joy, but Elisa said, "Did you hear anything? Like a woman crying?" I ignored her. Maybe she was feeling uneasy in a new place. The house was dark and heavy. Strange shadows were falling on the walls, although the lights were on properly. Sarah put the dishes in the cupboard, and I went with the children to another part of the house. John joked, "What do you think, Mike? Are there ghosts here?" We both laughed, but Elisa remained silent. She said, "This house doesn't feel right. There's something here. I can feel it." We brushed it off as a joke. But when I first stepped near the stairs, it felt like someone was staring at my back. I turned around, but there was no one there. At nightfall, we all went to our respective rooms. The kids were on the top floor, and Sarah and I were in the room downstairs. John and Alyssa had camped in the living room. Everything seemed quiet, but there was something behind this quietness. At about 2 a.m., Sarah woke me up. She said, "Mike, I felt like someone was standing at the window." I immediately got up and went to the window. The whole area outside was deserted. Only the shadows of the trees and the sound of a light wind could be heard. I told Sarah, "You must have dreamed. Everything is fine." But she was trembling with fear. Just then, the children's screams were heard from upstairs. Sarah and I immediately ran upstairs. Amy and Josh were sitting on the bed in fear. They said that someone knocked on their room's door and then tried to open it. When I looked at the door, there were fresh scratch marks on its edges. It looked as if someone had forcefully scratched the door to get in. John and Elisa also came upstairs. John said, "Something is wrong here, Mike. I thought I saw someone walking up the stairs." We all gathered in one room, scared. Then I saw a shadow in the window glass. It was very vague, but its presence was clear. It seemed as if it was watching us. Sarah slammed the door shut and said, "This house is trying to kill us." Just then, the power went out. The room went dark. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the children and our voices trembling with fear. I took out my flashlight and turned on the light, but as the light fell on the walls, there were blood-red marks. Elisa said, "I don't want to stay here. I saw a shadow of a woman in the bathroom. She was staring at me. Her eyes were red." She cried loudly and said, "We have to leave from here." John tried to calm her down, but then we heard someone walking on the stairs again. The sound was getting louder, As I turned the flashlight in that direction, there was nothing on the stairs. Around 3 a.m., when everyone was trying to sleep, I heard someone walking in the living room. I slowly went out and saw that a chair was moving by itself. I woke John up, and when he went near the chair fell by itself. Just then, strange scratches started appearing on the wall. It seemed as if an invisible hand was tearing the wall. In the morning, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but the fear was still with us. Alyssa said, "Mike, this house will never let us live in peace." John said, "We have to find out about the history of this house. Something very bad has happened here. Will this house ever let us live in peace, or will it destroy our lives?" Even after dawn, the silence and events of the night were still fresh in everyone's mind. "This house will not let us live in peace," said Sarah. Recalling the events of the night, Elisa said, "What I saw was not a dream. That woman was really watching me." John suggested that we should find out about the history of this house. After searching on the internet, we came to know that a family used to live in this house earlier, who had experienced strange and scary things here. They had fled from this house overnight. In the afternoon, an old man came outside the house. He seemed to be a resident of the area. He warned us, "This house is cursed. The people who lived here earlier left it because they felt some evil powers here. If you people stay here any longer, you will also become a victim like them." His words scared everyone further. John tried to ignore him, but Elisa said, "Maybe he is telling the truth. We should take it seriously." By evening, a strange silence prevailed in the house. The children did not go out to play. There was a feeling of heaviness in every corner of the house. John said, "Did you notice? There is something strange in the air today." Sarah noticed that the lights were flickering by themselves. When I checked the switchboard, there was nothing wrong there. Elisa said fearfully, "It is starting to happen what happened last night." At around 9 p.m., we felt ghostly activities for the first time. The clock hanging on the wall suddenly fell down by itself. The clock stopped forever, and its hands got stuck at 3 o'clock. Alyssa said, "This is giving some indication." At 11 p.m., while we were all having dinner, Amy and Josh went to their room to play. Half an hour later, when I went to call them, they were not in the room. The door was open, and so was the window. We searched for them all over the house, but they were nowhere to be found. Then the sound of children laughing came from the garden. When John and I went out, there was no one there, but there were small footprints of children on the grass. When we started looking deeper into the garden, we saw a shadow of a woman going inside the house. That shadow slowly disappeared, but it put a cold fear in our hearts. At around 2 a.m., the sound of a woman crying started coming from inside the house. The sound was so scary that we got goosebumps. The sound was coming from the roof. When we all went to the roof, there was nothing there, but there were blood marks on the roof timbers. The blood looked fresh, as if someone had just been hurt. When we looked down from the roof, we saw that the children's swing was moving on its own. Elisa said, "This place is trying to kill us." John went near the swing and tried to stop it, but as soon as he touched the swing, someone pushed him backwards. We all ran to John when we heard him screaming for help. He said, "I saw him. He's here." His eyes were wide with fear. He told that a shadow touched him, and he felt as if all his strength was taken away. He said, "He won't let us leave." In the last part of the night, all the events suddenly stopped. A strange silence descended on the house. But we knew that this silence was only the calm before the storm. With the light of the morning, we got some relief. But we knew that this battle was not over yet. We had to face the secrets and dangers of the house. With the sun rising, a temporary peace descended on the house. Everyone was tired and mentally disturbed after the scary experience of the night. Sarah said, "Maybe we should leave from here. This place is not safe for us." But John replied, "If we run away, it will haunt us forever. We have to face it." Elisa, who was silent till now, said in a low voice, "Did you feel that the shadow was trying to tell us something?" This was creating a deep uneasiness in everyone's mind. During breakfast in the morning, Amy told that she had seen strange symbols on the wall of her room. When everyone went and looked, there were symbols drawn there, like some secret mantras from the old times. Those symbols seemed to be made of blood, but they disappeared when they were touched. Sarah said, "And this house is trying to take us somewhere." John decided to go to the local library and find out about the history of this house. The records there revealed that this house was built in the 1800s. The first family that lived in this house was the victim of strange events. Their young daughter suddenly disappeared and was never found. The old caretaker of the library warned, "This house is made to imprison someone's soul. Whoever lives here succumbs to the power of this place." As the sun started to set, the atmosphere inside the house became heavy again. The air became cold and dense. The lights started to flicker slowly. It seemed as if someone was watching from every corner. Amy and Josh were playing in their room, but they reported that the toys started moving on their own. Amy said in fear, "I felt as if someone else was playing with us." After dinner, everyone was sitting in the living room. Suddenly a strange sound started echoing. It was the sound of a woman crying, which was gradually getting louder. Sarah said tremblingly, "It could be the spirit of that missing girl." John decided that we should follow the crying sound. The sound led us to the basement. In the basement we saw an old safe, which was rusted. The same mysterious symbols were engraved on the safe, which was seen on the wall in the morning. Alyssa said, "There is definitely something hidden here." When trying to open the safe, suddenly the wind became strong and the lights went off. The safe opened on its own, and an old diary and some pieces of old clothes came out from inside. The diary said, "This house is eating our souls. We see no way to escape from here. Whoever reads this, know that this house is cursed. The only solution is to burn it down." As John read the diary, a black shadow appeared in the basement. It was floating in the air, its eyes were red, and it was slowly moving towards us. Everyone tried to escape, but the door was closed. The shadow said in a terrifying voice, "You guys are trying to uncover the secrets of this house. Now you will live with me. Forever." Sarah said in fear, "We have to do something, or else it will kill us." The instructions written in the diary revealed that this house can be pacified only by finding its old secret room and burning the things buried in it. "We have to destroy it, or else it will never let us live in peace," John said. Using the map found in the diary, we discovered a secret door under the living room floor. The door was rusty, and it took a lot of effort to open it. Inside was a small room, in which were an old toy horse, a broken mirror, and some children's clothes. These were the things that belonged to the missing girl. John decided to take those things outside and burn them. But as he burned them, everything inside the house started shaking. It seemed as if the house was about to collapse. The shadow appeared one last time and said, "This is just the beginning. You did not defeat me." Finally, after burning the things, everything became quiet. The house felt light for the first time. But everyone had this question. Was the shadow really gone? Or was this the beginning of a new horror story? The scariest incident happened on the third day. Blood-red water started leaking from the walls of the house. It was not a fault in any tap, because the walls were completely dry. When I touched it, the blood was warm. Sarah told me that she should leave this place, but I dismissed it as just a strange coincidence. Sarah's heart was beating fast. With every step, every moment, she felt that something was wrong. Her body was trembling, as if some invisible force was slowly moving to capture her. She was not just in a house, but trapped in a trap, and she was completely unable to understand it. Ever since they had come to that house, Sarah had felt that there was a deep silence in every wall, a deep peace that comes before a terrible storm. The darkness of the night seemed even more frightening to her. In the darkness of the night, the silence of the house was a big silence which could break at any moment. Sarah's fear was slowly entering her heart, as if that fear was slowly swallowing her. At night, when strange sounds started coming, those same scenes started floating in front of Sarah's eyes again. In the dark, an old girlish shadow would appear and disappear before her eyes. She would constantly question herself, is this all true or just my imagination? But when she heard the sound once again, coming from the corner of the house, she knew it wasn't just her imagination. It was something very real, something that was around them. She felt as if there was someone else around her, and that person was always ready to catch her. She slowly lowered her face and tightened her body, as if trying to escape from someone. Her breathing was getting faster, and as the fear increased, her body started feeling even more tired. John always felt that he could handle himself in any situation, but this time, what he felt was something different. The shadow he had seen in the basement was very different from any other ghostly experience. His heart was filled with deep fear, because he felt that this was something that no human being had ever experienced before. When he went down to the basement, there was a strange silence in the darkness. John took the flashlight out of his pocket and slowly walked forward. As he went down, it felt as if someone was watching him. A staring eye was on his back. He never dared to turn around, because he was afraid that if he looked back even once, he would see something that he would never forget. Then, as he approached an old door, he felt strange, cold winds that touched his face. He shivered completely. But even more terrifying was the experience when he saw that a corner of the basement suddenly started shaking, as if someone had placed something there, and then it all stopped. When John opened that door, the deep dark air inside seemed to pull him in. He understood that this house was truly cursed after seeing the torn diary and clothes. He realized that there was something in this house that would never let him and his family leave. This fear in John's heart had now turned into a deep fear. His courage was slowly breaking, and as he moved inside the door, he started wondering if they would ever be able to get out of this house. The shadow of this house was growing behind them, and he felt that this house was not just a house, but a punishment that they would have to suffer for centuries. The situation of both Sarah and John had now completely changed. The more they tried, the more that house was breaking their confidence. There was a new, mysterious power in every corner of the house, which was dominating them. Sarah's body was shivering, while John's heart was beating fast. Both of them were looking into each other's eyes, but they did not know what would happen the next moment. They were afraid that they would never be able to get out of that house. Their breathing had become heavy, as if they were surrounded by some invisible force, and at every step, at every moment, they were realizing that the house was coming after them. Their voices had now become so low that no one could hear, as if their fear was trying to hide itself on them. And when the darkness of the night fell upon them again, they realized that this was a game which they could never win. The next morning, we saw that there were scratch marks on every glass of the house. It looked as if someone had tried to write something on them with their nails. "You are ours now," was written on the walls. We felt that staying here any longer could be fatal. We left that house the same day. Later we came to know that a terrible murder had taken place in this house earlier. A man had killed his entire family, and it is said that his spirit still roams in this house. Today, when I am telling this story, my heart still trembles with fear. Whenever I see a shadow on the window at night, I feel that shadow has come back again. Can you dare to spend a night in that house? Story 2. Winchester Mystery House. My name is Ryan Carter, and I am a travel vlogger. There is a strange excitement at the beginning of every new journey, but this time something was different. I felt that this trip was going to be a turning point for me, but I had no idea that whatever would happen, it would turn every night of my life into a nightmare. It was morning time, and I was heading towards Winchester Mystery House, in my car with my sister Maggie, younger brother Ethan, and best friend Sophie. Everyone was excited, but my mom's words were going through my mind again and again. She said, "Ryan, I am not feeling good. You people should not go there." I laughed at Mom's words, but there was a strange uneasiness inside. I didn't tell anyone this, but I had a dream last night. A shadowy woman was looking at me and saying, "Come back. You won't be able to return." I ignored this dream, thinking it was just an imagination, but now those things were roaming in my mind. Ethan was busy playing songs from his playlist, Maggie was making her Instagram stories, and Sophie was checking the map. When we reached in front of the Winchester Mystery House, everyone became silent for a moment. There was a different world in front of us. The structure of the house was weird. It made no logical sense. Stairs that stopped in the middle, windows that were on the ground, and a massive door that seemed to signal the beginning of a journey. Maggie got excited. "Oh my God, this looks like a fun place. Ryan, imagine how much fun it would be inside." Ethan got serious for a second. "This house looks really weird to me. I feel like something is wrong here." Sophie was practical. He said, "Such structures disturb us because they challenge human logic. There is no ghost or evil. It is just a psychological impact." I calmed everyone down and said, "Come, let's go inside. I will record this whole experience for my vlog." But as we walked inside the house, a gust of cold wind came. It was a warning, but we could not understand it. As soon as we stepped inside the house, we felt a strange heaviness. The air inside the room was cool, but there was a damp smell, like old clothes and mud. Maggie commented, "This house really feels haunted, Ryan." As we walked in, the creaking sound of the floors could be heard on every step. A guide came to greet us, but his face was a little pale. He said, "You are welcome here, but remember one thing. This house is not just a structure, it is a story, and maybe something else too." Ethan asked, "What do you mean? Does something strange really happen here?" The guide laughed, but there was a strange tension in his eyes. Everything inside the house was like a puzzle. A staircase was going up to the ceiling without any exit. When one door was opened, it opened in front of a blank wall. Sophie got irritated after seeing all this. "This is just an architectural prank. There is nothing to do with spirits." But Ethan was completely quiet. He said to me, "Ryan, I feel someone is watching us." Making fun of him, I said, "You are watching a lot of horror movies." But from inside, I also felt that we were not alone. We went to a secluded part of the house, where there was a locked door. The guide said, "This is Sarah Winchester's seance room. Here she tried to talk to the spirits who were haunting her." Maggie was curious and tried to open the door. I stopped him. "Maggie, don't." The guide told me not to. But he said laughingly, "Ryan, it's just a door." Just then, a gust of cold wind blew and Ethan started to shiver. I thought someone touched me. Sophie said, making fun of Ethan, "Relax, it's just your imagination." But Ethan was absolutely pale, as if he had experienced something real. As we moved forward, we heard the sound of footsteps in a narrow hallway, but there was no one in front of us. Ethan pulled out a flashlight and said, "There's some noise coming from here." We were all looking at each other, as if we were waiting for confirmation from each other. Then a whispering sound came, which seemed very close. "It's time to go." Maggie grabbed my hand in fear, and Sophie, who was skeptical, her face became very serious. She said, "It could be an illusion, but we need to get out of here." We reached a large room inside the house which was completely empty, but there were strange symbols drawn on its walls. Then the guide said, "These symbols were drawn to confuse the spirits." Sarah thought that if the spirits were kept in a fun place, they would leave them alone. Ethan said, "I think this fun is not made for spirits, but for us." I saw a shadow in the corner of the room, which was slowly moving towards us. Then I heard a woman's voice. "You all go away from here. This is not your home." We all froze completely, and that shadow figure disappeared. Now we understood that this house is not just a mystery, it is a trap. As soon as we reached in front of maybe Winchester Mystery House, everything was not as we had thought. Our car stopped, and we all got the first glimpse of this haunted place with our eyes. The structure of the house was quite strange, like a fun, and there was a feeling of an old wind everywhere. That wind, which was falling on our faces, was accompanied by a strange cold, which filled not only our share, but also our mind with a lot of fear. Ethan's face had turned a little pale, but he tried to hide his fear. Maggie laughed a little. "It's just an old house, nothing more." But Sophie, who was always skeptical, had a very serious face. She said, "This house is a little different, you guys see." We all didn't take it too seriously, but a strange feeling was living inside us all. We all started getting out of our cars and started walking towards the door of the house. There was an old bell in front of the door, which started shaking slowly, as if someone had stolen it. My heart started beating a little faster, but I composed myself and thought that all this could just be a figment of my mind. "This house will surprise you, but what is inside is not everyone's cup of tea to face," said the guide, who was standing in front of us. We started following the guide, but as soon as we opened the door, a strange gust of wind came in front of us. We could hear the sound of the bell inside the house, but nobody was visible. Our steps were moving forward with the sound of the bell in each room. The temperature inside the house was quite cold, and the air inside had some weight, as if taking every breath inside was a tough task. Every corner, every spark, everything in the house was strange. There were stairs inside the house which were going up to the ceiling, and some of them ended in a strange and suspenseful feeling. Ethan saw and said, "Where are these stairs going? They are not ending inside." Those stairs had no purpose, as if they were made by someone without any design, and then those doors, which were opening in front of the walls, as if those doors were moving from their place like a fun. The windows inside the house were very strange. Their designs were somewhat old and weird. Those windows were at ground level, but it was difficult to understand how they were connected to the floor. Maggie saw and said, "All this looks a bit strange. Is all this just an old design? Or is there something else that we are not able to understand?" Sophie saw all these things with her eyes, but her face had become absolutely serious. He looked around the house with his eyes and said, "This design is wrong. It doesn't seem to be of any use. There is a mystery in this house." As we went further inside, the atmosphere of the house became even more dense. We saw a long corridor, which was quite old and dark. We all started walking from there, but as we moved forward, we had a strange feeling that someone was watching us. Ethan said, "I think someone is coming after us. The air has become quite cold." Maggie laughed and said, "Are you scared? This is just an old and haunted place." But Sophie was not enjoying it at all. She was completely serious. He rolled his eyes and said, "This is not just wind. There is something happening to us." Then we heard a strange sound, a deep and hoarse voice. "Why are you here? Do you think this is your house?" We all turned our faces, but no one was there. "All this could be part of our imagination," Maggie said, but her face had turned a little pale. "How did this sound come?" Ethan said with a little fear. We all stopped for a while, but Sophie said, "We are all seeing something. I am not able to understand anything." As we moved closer, something more strange happened. There was an old wooden mirror in a corner of the house which showed some reflection. We looked, but there was no one there. Only some shadows were visible, quite sharp. "This is all seeming a bit over me," Maggie said. We reached another hall where everything looked old and spooky. "Do you think we are understanding everything?" Sophie said. The silence inside the house and the strange stillness of everything was making us even more terrified. Then we heard the sound of another old bell, which someone had secretly shaken. Everything seemed to be shaking from its place, and we saw that another room, which was completely closed, had opened. This room was quite old inside, and a strange smell came from there, which was of some old candles and raw clothes. The air inside the house had become a little denser. As we were trying to enter, we heard the sound of another bell. "Why have you all come here? What are you afraid of?" This was the voice of an old woman, which rang in someone's old memories. Maggie said, "All this has become too much." Ethan's face had turned completely pale now. "Can we get out of here?" I thought, but I saw that no matter where we went, that eerie feeling was with us. This house was connected to another world. We stepped into a remote hallway inside the house. This hallway was old and slowly growing, as if some invisible force was stopping us at every step. With the sound of a small bell, we saw a room that was completely different. This was a locked room, whose door was old and a little rusted. Like the rest of the house, this room was also surrounded by a dark aura. "This is Sarah Winchester's seance room," the guide said. "She used to do her rituals here, talking with spirits." When the guide said this, all of us became a little tense. Maggie, who was always curious, looked away from him out of the corner of her eye and said, "I think we should go inside. There might be something important there." But the guide told her no. "This room was only for Sarah Winchester. It doesn't mean that it's okay for you to open it," the guide said with full force, which we all listened to carefully. I also stopped Maggie. "What did you see?" "This room looks different. There is something." I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching us from the inside. It felt like everything was pulling us toward them. Ethan's strange feelings. We moved forward, and as we turned the other side of that hallway, we felt something more than a shock. Ethan said, "I think someone touched my shoulder." Everyone laughed and said, "Friend, your imagination is working." Maggie made fun of him a little, but Ethan's face had turned pale. He hugged his body and said, "No, this is true. I feel something is wrong. Someone is watching me, or talking to me." I looked at his face. There was fear on his face. He said, "Ryan, I feel something is wrong here. Are you also having this feeling?" "I'm not able to understand," I replied. "Maybe you are a little nervous, that's all. Whatever is in your mind, it could be just imagination." But deep inside, I felt that what Ethan was saying could be true. Whatever he felt, it was also inside me. I just didn't express it. Voice coming from inside and the sound of the bell coming back. As we moved a little further, the sound of a bell started to be heard. Cling, clang. The sound was halting for a while, as if someone had waved it with his hands. I looked, but there was no one there. We all looked at each other, but did not talk to anyone. Sophie said, "It's all very weird. You are feeling it all, right? Her face was quite serious. I gathered my mind and said, I think it's all a game of our mind. This is an old house. Everything is old. Maggie said, Did you hear that bell ringing? This is another level of suspense. Suddenly, another old voice started to be heard. The voice of an old woman, which slowly came near us. Why have you come here? Why do you think this house is yours? We all froze completely. We turned our faces around, but there was no one. Whose voice was this? Ethan said. The open life and dark shadows of the door. We moved forward, but we were not able to see her voice with our eyes. Suddenly there was a dark room in front of us, where an old wooden door was open. We were all hesitating a bit, but finally we stepped in that direction. As soon as we opened the door of the room, a strange sound of a bell was heard again. Cling, clang. As we moved a little further, we heard the sound of a bell. Cling, clang. This sound was a little halting, as if someone had waved it with their hands. We looked, but no one was there. We all looked at each other, but did not talk to each other. Sophie said, All this is very weird. You are feeling everything, right? Her face was quite serious. I gathered my mind and said, I think all this is a game of our mind. This is an old house. Everything is old. Maggie said, Did you hear that bell ringing? This is another level of suspense. Suddenly, another old voice started to be heard, the voice of an old woman, which slowly came near us. Why have you come here? Why do you think this is your house? We all froze completely. We turned our faces around, but there was no one. Whose voice was this? Ethan said. The open life and dark shadows of the door. We moved forward, but we could not see her voice with our eyes. Suddenly there was a dark room in front of us, where an old wooden door was open. We all hesitated a bit, but finally we stepped in that direction. As soon as we opened the door of the room, a strange sound of a bell was heard again. Cling, clang. We looked and realized that this could not be the work of the wind. This was the voice of someone else, who was walking with us. Then another bell rang. Who are you all? What are you doing here? We all reached near the sense room, and Maggie opened the door without any warning. As soon as the door opened, a strange smell entered our nose. It was an old, dry smell, like the smell of old clothes or a burning candle. It felt like we had stepped into an old time, where everything carried its old path. Sophie swung her flashlight around the room. As the light entered the room, a cool breeze hit our faces. This was no ordinary breeze. It was like the feeling of an invisible presence. We all slowly stepped inside, but as we stepped into the room, we felt a void. Everything inside the room was old, wooden walls, an old table, and old chairs. And the strangest thing was that some candles were still burning inside the room. All this was really strange, because the presence of any human being here was a far-fetched thing, but the burning of candles, old things, all this felt as if some force was pulling us in. There was curiosity in Maggie's eyes. She picked up an old diary with her hand, which was kept on the table. The diary was old, its cover was quite faded, and some random symbols and Sarah Winchester's notes were written in it. Maggie read it and said, "Look at this. It seems someone else has written it." I moved closer and turned the diary towards me. A line written in it made me freeze. "They are always watching. Don't let them in." These lines froze my heart. Did Sarah write this? Ethan asked, but I had no answer. These lines were old and full of fear. We looked at each other and did not answer. All of our faces had turned pale. This line made us understand that there was something else going on here that we were not able to understand. There was some truth in what Sarah Winchester had written. Is it true, or did she just go crazy? Ethan said, "Are you all watching?" We looked around at our faces. but again we couldn't see anyone. These shadows were behind us now, very close to each other, as if they had become bells inside us. Whose shadows were these? Sophie said a little hesitantly. Did they come after watching us? We all looked at each other again. These shadows were with us. There was a strange pressure, as if every breath had become bells inside us like old air. We all realized that something was changing. These shadows were something else, moving around us and watching us. As we tried to open the door again with our efforts, another voice began to be heard. Why are you here? We have to do something with you. This voice had become more intense now. We were all shaking with our bodies, and Ethan shouted again, I have to stop all this. All this is not normal at all. Then the sound of an old bell started to be heard, and we saw that an old humming was being heard from behind the door, as if some old house was hiding something to show us its old history. In the corner of the room, we saw a shadow figure, which was slowly growing. Sophie directed the flashlight on it, but the shadow disappeared. Then we heard a whisper. This house is not yours. Maggie was crying out of fear, and Ethan became very tense. We tried to open the door, but then another shadow figure came in front, and it took the form of a woman. Her face was blurred, but her eyes were completely black. She said, You guys leave from here, otherwise you will never be able to leave this house. I understand that you'd like an expanded and deeply terrifying version of Chapter 5, involving shadow figures and eerie suspense. Here's how we can extend and heighten the tension with sensory details and eerie descriptions to build a sense of dread and anticipation. As we entered the dark seance room, everyone felt a strange gust of cold air. The wind was absolutely silent, but there was a terrifying force in it, as if something was very near to us, but we could not see it. In the corner of the room, something seemed to be moving, as if a shadow was moving slowly. We all turned our eyes to look, but we did not notice the shadow at first. It was something else. Sophie, who had become a little suspicious, turned her flashlight in that direction. As soon as the light fell on the shadow, it disappeared momentarily. We all held our breath and looked at each other. This was not normal. If this was just an illusion, then where did it come from? How did this shadow disappear so easily? Just then, a strange voice started to be heard. This is not your house. The voice was low, old, and full, as if some old room was talking to us. Maggie's face turned completely black, and she was crying out of fear. Her face had turned so pale that it seemed as if someone was watching her secretly. He too was stunned, and he bowed down with shame, as if he was not able to understand anything. Is this all really happening? Ethan said in a low voice, and there was fear in his eyes too. We tried to open the door, but as we opened the door, by pressing it a little harder, another shadow figure came in front of us. This shadow was not an ordinary shadow like the first one. It was old and dark. We turned our eyes and looked, and then we all saw that this shadow was slowly starting to take a form. That shadow was taking the form of a woman. His face was completely blurred, like an old photograph that was slowly changing. But his eyes were completely black. Those eyes were like bells ringing deep inside us, as if they were bells ringing in our hearts. And then he said in his terrifying voice, You all go away from here, otherwise you will never be able to leave this house. The voice was so loud that a noise started to be heard in all of our ears. There was such a deep fear in his words, which was ringing deep inside us. A bell, an old room that was trying to scare us. Sophie's face turned completely pale. Yeah, what is all this going on? She said. Her voice was so low that we all felt as if our faces were not standing in front of that shadow. We all held our breath. We were all looking at each other. but no one was able to say anything. The level of darkness inside us was slowly increasing. Every moment something else was happening, which we were not able to understand. The form of this woman, which had changed from a shadow, was moving around us, as if she wanted to understand some important things. She took a step forward and said, "Something can happen to you if you don't leave this house." Her voice had now become more intense, as if it had become a bell inside us. The beating of our hearts had increased, and we were all looking around us, but no one could understand what we should do. Then another hidden thing happened. The sound of an old bell was heard near us. "You have to stay with us." This voice now came from near our heads, as if someone had blown a sound in our ears. We were all trying to close our eyes, but that voice was still going inside us. Suddenly there was a flash of light in the room. This light was exactly like a bell, which we get to hear in old stories. We all hid our eyes, but when we opened our eyes, we saw that the shadow had come back again. That shadow slowly stood in front of us, and another change happened in front of us. This shadow was none other than an old woman with a bell on her face. There was something else in her eyes. These eyes were of a soul, which was always trying to see someone else. Maggie closed her eyes and said, "Is this really happening? Is she playing with us?" Maggie's face had now turned completely pale, and her face had become blurred in front of that shadow. Just then, the sound of another bell started to be heard. "You will not be able to do anything here." I slowly opened my eyes and looked, but this shadow had become another thing. "You cannot do anything. You are all trapped here." All this was like a bell, as if something new was happening every moment. We were not able to understand how we came here, but we were going inside. We wanted to see why these shadows were playing with us. As soon as we left that dark and scary seance room, we were all quite terrified. Ethan had somehow broken the door, and we all tried to escape from there as much as we could. But what we had thought was something else. The structure of the house was completely different. A strange breeze was coming from somewhere, and our footsteps were echoing in that wind. Every step was like a bell in the ground, and the fear inside us was increasing. We tried to get out of the door, but footsteps started being heard everywhere inside the house. These footsteps were walking along with us, as if someone was following us from behind. With every step, the beating of our heart was getting faster, and we held our breath. This wind was something else, a wind which we were not able to understand, as if there was someone else near us, but we were not able to see him. As we were lying in a narrow hallway, I started seeing that blurred-faced woman. My heart stopped immediately. She was the same woman I had seen in my dream. Her face was completely blurred, like the face of an old woman lost in the dust of time. There was something in her eyes, something that we were feeling deep inside ourselves. The color of her face was also slowly changing, as if she wanted to say something, but was trying to hide something from us. I felt that everything was an illusion, but at that time, something else was happening. I wanted to see her with my eyes, but this figure was pulling me towards itself out of fear. I shouted and said, "What do you want?" But she said only one line. "You have disturbed me." **. The voice that she spoke was such a voice that it rang deep inside us, as if there was some old story hidden in her words. The intensity in her words was creating a deep pain in our hearts. None of us was saying anything else. We were all just speeding up our steps as if we were running away from someone. There was a strange bell everywhere inside the house. We tried to move forward, but another dark shadow figure started appearing in front of us. We closed our eyes, but that shadow figure was slowly coming near us. We all opened our eyes again and saw that that shadow figure was now near us. We immediately changed our path, but as we tried to move ahead, another face appeared in front of us. This face was none other than that blurred-faced woman. She was holding an old photo frame which slowly started coming in front of us. There was no expression on his face. It was just a clock that we were feeling inside us. We were trying to run away from there, but something was stopping us. Ethan raised his leg and then heard a sound as if someone had grabbed his leg. He fell down. Hearing Ethan's cheeks, we were all quite shocked. "I thought someone had grabbed my leg," Ethan said. His face had turned completely pale, and the fear he showed in his eyes along with his words also entered inside us. We picked him up and ran away with him. We did not see which path we were taking. There was only one goal: to get out of the house. Every step was like a victory for us, but the wind inside the house was always pulling us inside, as if we were going on an old path, which we had not recognized somewhere, where something always appeared familiar. As we tried to reach the entrance of the house, none of us was saying anything. We were all completely silent, and there was only one question in our eyes. Is all this really happening? We started hearing some weird whispers from inside the house. "You are going, but we will never let you go." We increased our speed, but then we saw that something else started appearing around the house. That shadow figure was still following us. Ethan's face had turned quite pale by now, but we somehow managed to lift him up, and we all ran towards the car. As soon as we opened the car door, another chill started to be heard, as if someone had come near us. But we started the car and drove it at full speed. We looked behind us, but the house was still watching us with the same bell. As soon as we went a little further, we thought that whatever we had seen was all a hoax, but we still felt the same fear in our hearts. The car kept moving, but there was a strange silence among all of us. Ethan's face was still very pale, and he was not saying anything. Maggie was also silent. Her face still hurt from the sight of that face, and Sophie was also holding her hands very tightly. We later thought that there could be a logical explanation for what we had seen there, but none of us were facing that incident. Everything was really horrifying. We had already run away from home, but the fear that was inside us was never going to come with us. After that night, something changed inside all of us. Whatever we saw in the Winchester Mystery House, we could never get out of our minds. All the horrors of that scary house had become such a nightmare inside us, which became deeper with time. We were all digesting that experience in our own way, but one thing was common in all of us. There was a shadow on all of us, which was never going to leave us. Maggie, who earlier considered everything in her world practical and logical, had completely changed after that night. She started believing in the supernatural. She read her old journals all the time, writing down her feelings and experiences. She left her old life behind and was now obsessed with anything paranormal. She did her research all the time and visited sites where people shared their supernatural encounters. No explanation was enough for her anymore. Whatever she saw at the Winchester Mystery House became part of her reality. One day, she was talking to me, and she said, "I feel those spirits are following me. The fear in their eyes, that smile. I still feel it." Maggie's face had turned completely pale. There was a hidden fear in her eyes, and her hands were always trembling. The same fear that we had felt that night was inside Maggie too, but she never shared her fear with anyone. She had made paranormal activities a part of her research, but her mind was not accepting it. She was experiencing something strange, as if some invisible force was following her. There was a reflection of fear in Maggie's eyes for a long time, as if someone had told her that something will always be with you. Sophie, who was once a skeptic scientist and who always tried to give logical explanations to supernatural things, was now changing her entire belief system. She decided to do paranormal research. Her first step was to record the things that happened inside the Winchester Mystery House. Sophie had a strange curiosity, but at the same time, there was a fear. She was fighting with herself. On one hand, there was her scientific mind, and on the other hand, there were the things she saw that were beyond her scientific knowledge. One night, Sophie said to me, "I think there must be a reason for the things we saw there. There may be some energy field in that house, but more research is necessary about it." But whatever she said, the fear in her eyes, I understood everything. Even now, the memories of that time made Sophie restless at night. There was always a pride on her face, but whenever she talked about Winchester, there was a strange worry on her face. Sophie said one day, "I feel that what we saw was something else, a glimpse of some other world." As she said this, I felt that Sophie was also beginning to see something else. What we all felt was buzzing inside her like a bell. Ethan's nightmares and his unseen fears. Ethan still had nightmares. Every night he claimed to see the same faces and voices that he had seen inside the house. He said, "I feel they have kept me inside them. Every night their faces talk to me. They want to take me with them." Ethan said once, "I saw them. There was nothing alive in their eyes. There was just an old bell, which was always telling me that you will have to stay with us now." Ethan's condition had become worse now. The gloom on his face was enough for him to understand. His mind was slowly breaking down now. He said, "I want to forget that night, but these nightmares are in my mind, and they will never leave." What was inside Ethan was something that was controlling him. Every day he became more disturbed. He tried to incorporate every shadow and movement of light onto himself. His old cheerful nature was now completely gone. And me? I still remember that night, that room, that invisible force that took us home. My heart always wants to go back there, but my mind forbids me. Even today when I am alone, I hear those sounds. That sound of a bell in the wind, those whispers, those shadows that always stay near me. If you are planning to go to the Winchester Mystery House, remember one thing: those who will disturb you here will never leave you. These words keep repeating in my mind as if some invisible force is telling me, "You will always be with us." Whatever we saw in the Winchester Mystery House was an everlasting warning for us. That house was not just a building, it was a portal, a place that could pull anyone in at any time, and whoever went in could never put his life at risk.